Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Art 192, Digital Imaging / Photoshop for the spring semester 2022. Today, what I want to do is to introduce you to the basics of typography, since the next lesson will cover typography, which is lesson 7. Understand what it has some very robust tools in Photoshop as well as Adobe Illustrator. In fact, there's more that you can do in Adobe Illustrator than you can do in Photoshop. Illustrator, I think, has better tools, typographic tools than Photoshop does. Anyway, that's neither here nor there for our class, but just to give you an idea of how typography works, and that it really is an important component to computer graphics, especially to graphic design. Graphic designers mostly, in fact, deal with typography and more than anything else. They may include illustrations or photography, but more often than not, they deal in layouts, and with those layouts that incorporate type, they're dealing with typefaces and fonts and you name it. Okay. So typography, the basics. The typeface that I have used for this is called Roman. Roman was based on the type that was found on Trajan's column in Rome. It had a unique proportioning system, and it was also only available in capital letters. Today, it is still beautiful and very elegantly designed, and is used frequently. You'll see shortly that it falls under the category of the serif family, these little extensions from the T and the foot of the T and the Y and the P and the G and R and so on. Those originally occurred because of the result of the chiseling in stone. The chisel created those little serifs. Today they serve and they have an actual function, and that oftentimes they do add in the readability of text you include in a body copy or in a headline. So it really can help and lend in the legibility of it. Okay, so let me scroll down to the next part. This won't take that long. So the basic categories of type are as follows. There are technically 5 different categories. There's serif, and you can see what I was talking about with the Roman. These little feet that extend, or appendages that extend from the feet and various parts of the letter forms. Then there's sans serif, which was developed in the 20th century due to enhancements and improvements in technology. And what they were able to do was to remove the serifs, and by doing so, they changed the proportioning system once again for the type. And what that allowed for is a variety of variations of the type. So now you could have condensed, italic, extended, and on and on and on, a whole bunch of different weights that you couldn't do with a serif typeface. These are the 2 type categories of type that are used more often than any other. Okay. Serif and sans serif can be used for headlines, subheads, and body copy frequently. Now, for those of you who later on will be designing on the web, I strongly suggest that you stay away from serif typefaces. I have found, this is my personal observation, that on the web, serif typefaces are difficult to read sometimes if they get too small. The sans serif typefaces are the ones that really hold up well on the video screen or monitor. The third category is script, handwritten script based on steel pen, pointed nib pen, not a flat. And then that today is used mostly for headlines, for special, purposes that you would have maybe for those of you who in the next assignment are designing the title for your movie poster. This could, very well in large, font work well. I think though, if you have a lot of words, if it's more than just a handful of words, and it becomes very difficult for most people to read these days. So unless it's for kind of a wedding announcement or baby shower or something like that, stay away from it. Again, use it for special purposes, mostly for headlines. The next is black letter. And this was developed during around 1900, 800, 1000 AD by monks when they were hand lettering Bibles and manuscripts with a broad pen. And it was at that time that the lowercase letters came into being. Prior to that, only caps, like what we see at the top here. And then the last category is decorative. And that I've shown you one decorative typeface, but there are just thousands of them available now. With the development of computer graphics, it really expanded exponentially the number of typefaces and fonts that have become available. So really, well, I've explained that there are 5 basic categories. If you put script in black letter under the decorative category, there are really only 3, and that's it. Okay. So again, serif and sans serif can be used for anything. Script, black letter, and decorative should only be used for headlines and just a handful of words. Otherwise, if it becomes too difficult to read for the viewer, they're going to go away. So what does it mean when I say categories? They break them down into 3 subcategories: type family, typeface, and the font. So the type family are basically the categories that I discussed. Which group are they fall in? Then you can find a typical typeface like Helvetica, which falls in the category of sans serif, but within that typeface, okay, there exists a whole number of fonts. And you can see that I've listed a handful of them down here, anywhere from condensed bold to condensed black to ultralight, italic, and on and on and on, and bold italic, all the way. And then I use this as an example, regular. So what does the font mean? It means within the category or within a family of typeface, Helvetica, that the font regular, for example, that all of the caps, the lowercase, the numerals, and the special character have been designed with that specific weight and style in mind. And while the appearance of the letter forms and all the other fonts look very similar, I can guarantee you that there are subtle changes and sometimes significant changes that they've had to make in order to make them work together as a unit. Okay, so if you're ever wondering, whether it's in Photoshop, Illustrator, or even in Word, what a font means, that's exactly what this is. It's a specific, a font is specific to a typeface, which is under a separate category or font family of, for example, sans serif. Okay, the next are the various parts of the letter forms. And so I've used the word body here with a capital B, and then so it's in the lowercase O-D-Y. You'll notice that the word rests on a line here, here. This is called the baseline. Okay. Then anywhere, and depending on the font that you're using, they will be designed differently. They won't all exist the same, even though you may specify a certain size, the design of the font will vary. And so what you'll see here, where the waistline is located, which would be where the lowercase letters, the top end of them reside, could vary. It could be higher, it could be lower, depending on the design of the type. Okay. Then we have the ascender, which is at the top, the part of a lowercase letter that extends above the waistline. Okay. And you'll notice with the typeface that I've used here, which is Times Roman, it actually extends above the cap, the height of the cap letter, the capital letter. And then aside from the ascender, we have something called the descender. That's the part of the letter form, lowercase, that extends below the baseline. Okay, so these are all the main parts of the letter form. Now there are many more. We have legs, arms, you name it, and they, each of the parts have the counter, you name it, have that I haven't included in this. But just the basics of typography, so that when you're using the type tool, you'll understand how things work. Now, when you're measuring type height generally goes from the top of the ascender to the bottom of the descender. So depending on the typeface or the font that you're using, you could be using 72 point for each of them, but they may look, decidedly different. One may look larger or smaller than another because of the design of where the ascender and the descender reside. Now you can, when you're setting type, specify type height based on the capital, but that would be, you would use the cap height for that. So back in the day when I started graphic design, we had to call out these specifications to typesetters. We would say the size that we want is a cap height, or in general, we want the type height, which would be, they would then measure from the ascender to the descender. Okay, and it's rarely used anymore, but the height from the baseline to the waistline is called the X height. Okay, but these terms have been in use for hundreds of years, and they continue, especially while being on, as they have been adapted to the web. The next is some of the nomenclature that's used, how type is measured. And you may notice that in Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator, that you'll see that type and line widths are usually measured in points. Well, a point has a specific size to it, and it can be translated to inches quite easily. So type usually is measured in points and picas. I would not change from that. I would not use inches or any other unit of measurement. It's universal. It's used around the world, these measurements. And so how they translate from one to the other is that 12 points equals 1 pica. And so 6 picas equal 1 inch. Now, if you do the math and you multiply 6 times 12, there are 72 points to an inch. Very small unit of measurement. And while it may seem insignificant, 1/72 of an inch is very small when you're measuring type and you're looking at 11 versus 12 point type. You can see there is a visual difference. It is, a very distinct difference. And you will find graphic designers who are typically type hounds, they may argue between using 7 or 8 point or 11 or 12 point, or something like that. Okay. And as I measured a moment ago, the type size is measured by the distance from the top of the ascender to the bottom of the descender. Okay. Now, other terms that are used when talking about type, and this too is used in Photoshop and Illustrator and other graphics programs. Capital letters are also referred to uppercase letters, or UC. The small letters are also referred to as lowercase letters, or LC. And those terms were developed in the 18th century when people like Benjamin Franklin, who had his print shop, they had these lead forms that were used that they inked to print the type. The uppercase letters or the capital letters were the cases that were set above, and the lowercase letters were the ones that were set below. That was how those terms came to be. They are still in use today when you talk about type, and it's still used extensively, in computer graphics programs. So that it hasn't changed. When computer graphics came out, they just adopted the traditional terminology so it wouldn't confuse anyone. But if you've never had a course in type, then it may seem foreign to you and not make any sense. Now, in the computer, it's very easy to adjust the space between individual letter forms and or words. That is called kerning. And there is a specific tool for that in Photoshop. And then there's also, if you want to uniformly adjust the space between letters and words, to expand the width of a line of type or make it more, condensed, that is called tracking. These are all important terms that you should commit to memory. And then the last one is the space between lines is called leading. And again, that kind of is a throwback to the 18th century because they had to hand set everything. If they wanted more space between lines of type, they would actually put little slivers of lead. And again, that term continues to exist today. Okay. Now, this is one of the last things. Now, this is a tabloid size newspaper. And while this is technically not a headline, it is a masthead. If this were translated into an ad, think of it as a headline. So this would typically be for a newspaper, be a masthead. These would be headlines. And right now we don't have any subheads. And then you have the body copy. But I wanted to put together something that was typical kind of layout that you may see in an ad, and you would see that typically, not always, but the headline is the largest element on the page, and typically at the top, not always. And then next you have the subhead, can be much smaller than the headline, and usually resides in a lower on the page than the headline. And then the smallest type on the page is the body copy. Okay. Now, there are type size ranges for these. And do you have to adhere to them? No. But they're a good place to start. Like, I have a significant amount of body copy. How big do I make it? The copy size typically can range between 8 and 13 point, depending on how much body copy you have and the size of the document you are creating. And then there's the common width. So depending on how many columns you have and the size of the paper, it will range between 13.5 picas to 48 picas. If you were to look in your textbook, my bet is that it isn't any wider than 48 picas, because if it is any greater than that, it's difficult for the viewer to track from one line to the next. Okay. Likewise, when you're looking at the multiple columns that you see in a newspaper, they're generally no smaller, no bigger than, or not any smaller than 13.5 picas. Because likewise, if it's too narrow, it makes it difficult to read as well. Subhead height can range between, or to start with, maybe between 14 and 18 points. And headlines can start at 24 point and be as big as you need them. Now, when you're designing your movie poster, you'll find that the sizes go way beyond these, that the head for your headline or title for your movie poster will be measured in inches. Okay. So how does that translate to, let me go ahead and bring Photoshop forward here, to using the type tool here. So if we select the type tool right down here, you'll notice that we can type horizontally or vertically. And then we have also these other two that should have been deprecated a while ago. These are vertical and horizontal in outline form, in where you can get the marquee, where you can get the marching ants. And it's typical that you just don't see it now, or don't, it's not used today. As I said, I like using the options menu along the top here, because it will give us, okay, what am I using here? I'm using horizontal type here. And if I were using vertical, it would be here. It tells me also here, what is the typeface that I'm using? Okay, Birch Standard, and then here would be the font regular. Okay, it gives me the type size and points. And then it tells me, am I setting it crisp, strong, smooth, sharp? Crisp is always a good place to start. And then other columns that I make, flush left, centered, or flush right, and then it specifies type, color here. The last one that we'll be using in a little bit, if I can get this accomplished today, is to be able to create warped text, which is really very nice. And then we have some other features here for paragraphs, you know, character and paragraph panels. We can bring those up from here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the paragraph and character panels, and I'm going to pull off the character panel here. And you'll notice the redundancy that's built in here, that when I have the type tool selected, there's also the same information that will be on the right. That when I use it and I click here, and I look in the properties panel, you'll see that it changed. So I have it, it's a lot of redundancy. I have the information available at the top. I have it available in the character panel. And I also have it available over in the properties panel to the right. By default, it goes ahead and it uses the last font that you had selected, or if you cleared it prior to that, it will go back to another default, I think. I can't remember which one it is. It's not important. And it uses what is called Greeking. It's gibberish, but it gives you a visualization of what type is supposed to look like, or what it will look like, what the words look like. So what you can do, if 32 point isn't big enough, and this is a nice feature in Photoshop that isn't available in Illustrator, is that I can click to the left here on the type tool, and I can drag to the right, and I can scale it up like so. Or I can put in a specific type size here. I can go back and I can say, you know what, I want it to be 72 point. And you can see that it is measured in points. Okay, so there it is. And I'm just going to go on the type some type here. I'm going to go ahead here. I want that to be, I have to get out of this. I want it to be auto. There we go. Now I'm going to come back over here with a type tool, and I'm going to highlight everything. And just like you were typing, in Word, I want to type some type. Okay. Now, because I'm not using the default settings here, we will see that the leading is set in metrics, but it is set to default. We're also looking at the leading up here, where it's set to auto. And then we also see the tracking here that's set to 250. I'm going to go ahead and highlight it all. Let's highlight all of this. Select A, Command A. And I'm going to set it back to normal. And we'll go through each one of these to, which should be set to 0. There you go. So you can change the color from here. Notice that without that tracking, the width of the type becomes considerably smaller or in width. And again, for each of these, I can click and drag to spread it out or to make it more dense. Okie doke. So I'm going to go back to 0 right now. But I am going to increase the size of it a little bit. My computer is slowing down. That's not good. Okay. So there's some type, and then I'm going to go ahead and click here and hit the return key. And I'll say more type. There we go, more type. Now, what we were talking about before, the space between these lines is called leading. And that's controlled up here where you see the little A and then underneath with an underline and then underneath it another A. So if I were to select both of these lines of type and come back here, I can again use the spinner to reduce the size, reduce the amount, or increase. So I'm trying to decrease it right now. And I'm getting a horrible lag time here. But you can see that when you're setting it, rather than automatic, I don't want it to be set to none. Let me go back here. I'm going to set, we have 200. So I'm going to set it solid on 200 point. So they're literally stacked on top of one another. So that's 208. Let's make that 200 point. There we go. So that's stacked right on top of one another. Now, if you wanted it set even tighter, we could go ahead and we could use negative leading. But you'll see down here some other things that I have established here. We can adjust, okay, the kerning. That's what this one is, that's in metrics. We just use the tracking. We can change the height without changing the width. We can change the width without changing the height. And here we can adjust where the type sits in relationship to the baseline. So if I deselect this, notice the baseline that's sitting right here underneath each one of these lines. Well, I can either move the type above or below using this tool right here. Now, some other options that they have in here for us is that I have all caps turned on. If I turn that off, it will go back to the way I typed everything. And the same here, I have here all caps. And the other, I'm sorry, the other one, the first one was faux bold. Now this should go back here, and there we go. Let's highlight this again. I'm going to type it in here. Some type. No, this went back again. I didn't want that. So let's highlight it all. Let's turn that off. And let's turn that off. There you go. So this is the way it looks normally. But it has that feature where if you wanted just all caps, and in some cases for situations where you're working with a title for a movie poster, you will want all caps. But if you have an inordinate number or a couple of lines of type, I would stay away from all caps because, again, it will be very difficult to read. What we can do in place of that or have small caps, and that's what this one is right here. And that can be a really smart way to design. So it differentiates, it adds emphasis to the words, and it differentiates one word from the next. Notice how they read a little bit differently, one another. And then we also have Let me go ahead and move this down a little bit so I can center it on the page. And let's go back to the text tool, type tool, whatever you want to call it. Go. I'll click here. We have Superscript and Subscript. No, I didn't want to do that. So I'm going to select no, I don't want to do that. The thing that's nice about using type tool also is that it automatically creates, and you should have already noticed that, it should automatically create a layer for itself as I have here. And that's really nice. And you'll notice that whatever words, numerals you use, special characters, they will be displayed in the layers panel. Now, another thing that we can do, you'll notice I added the letter 1 or the numeral 1. If I highlight that, I can use Superscript and it reduces the size of it and it pushes it up, or I can use Subscript down here. Now, if I highlight all of this whole line, select all, if I want, I can underline everything. To me, by my tastes, it looks a little horsey or kind of overbearing, kind of cumbersome. So I never use the underline feature that's here. But sometimes you may want a strike through, and that's what you find here. Depending on the type that you choose, you can have what are called ligatures, where they're taken, for example, the example here, the F and the I, and then combine them into one unit. They have many other features in here, depending on the typeface that you have selected. Excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze. So I'm going to turn off strike through. There we go. And let's work with a few other things in here before our day ends. So we've worked with leading. Okay, that's the one that's right up here in the upper right-hand corner. And on the fly, what we can do, and it's really pretty nice, is that if you want to see the size changes, or if you want to see the font changes on the fly here, we can come up here where it says let's Birch Standard, and while it's highlighted, I can click here. And as I move through each of these fonts, come on, there we go. It's changing it. So you can get a preview of what it's going to look like without having to commit. Arial is a common typeface. So you'll notice that even though I'm using the same type size, that some look larger or smaller, depending on how the font was designed. Let's go ahead and use Arial Black for a minute. And I'm going to have to make it 200 point, just won't fit on the page. So I'm going to make it 100 point. There we go. And I'm going to get rid of the subscript here. Okay. And let's go ahead and get rid of the small caps. Turn that off. You can see what we have here. And again, unless the type is selected, it won't be affected. It will only affect the next one. There we go. So some type. So as I was mentioning, that you can change here the distance from the type and how it rests on the baseline. If I go ahead and I spin this up a little bit, let's move it above. You're not going to see anything at the moment, but as soon as I select the type, we have the type selected, the type layer selected. Okay, you'll notice that the baseline is down here where that point is, but it's actually been moved up. And if I go ahead and I change that from 98 point to 0, it's going to move it down. So there are instances when you're going to want to do that. You're going to want to make changes to that. So again, it didn't change because I didn't have the type highlighted. And let's go ahead and put in 0. And you'll see what I mean when I change it. So the instances that you would use to change this, and I'm going to make the type much smaller, so hopefully it will, let's make it instead of 100 point, maybe 36 point. Okay. And I want the type to follow a circle. Okay, so if you want type to follow a path, we can do that. What I can do is I can start with the shape tool, and I'm going to use the ellipse tool, but I don't want it to be a shape. We will get to that in one of the next lessons. I want it to be a path. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hold down the Shift Option key, make my shape here. Okay, let's move it in place. Move it here so we just see a path and nothing else. Come on. Oh, wrong tool. Use this one to move it into position. There we go. Okay. So now if I want type to follow that path, I use the type tool and I move over the edge of it. And you'll notice that the cursor changes from a little I-beam to one with a little curly line that goes through it. When I click on there, notice that I get the type the same, the font and the same weight and the same size that I used up there, the last settings that I use. So now we can say, you know, my logo. Goes here. And it follows a path. It doesn't have to be a circle. It can be any path at all of any shape. Now, to get that to move, you have to use the move tool here, and you move over the edge. And now it will allow me to spin this around. And if I pull it inside, it goes on the inside of the circle. If I want it on the outside, it goes on the outside of the circle. Now I'm going to try to center this up. But what if I had graphics inside my circle and I wanted the type to lie outside of it? This would be a time when you would want to use this tool here to extend it beyond the baseline itself. So again, with the type tool selected, I'll go ahead and I'll highlight the text. And I'm going to go ahead, oh, there we go. And I'm going to change it from 0 points to, just to show you what I'm doing here, 12 points. And notice now it's raised above and lies outside of that circle that we created, but it still follows that path. That would be a good example of when you would want to do something like that. Okay, so I'm going to put that aside, move it over here. That's another nice thing, that since these are objects that lie on their own layer, you can set them anywhere you want and then move them later on and resize them to your heart's content. You needn't worry about the resolution of them because it automatically adopts the resolution of the file that you've created. So if you have a file that's 72 pixels per inch that you're using on the web, they will adopt to that resolution. If you're working in print and they're 300 pixels per inch, then they will be at that size. Now, one of the other things that we can do, which is really kind of nice, again, if I use the type tool again, let's select this one. And I'm going to go ahead and make this type a little bit larger again. I'll make it maybe 56 point or 54. Oh, come on. There we go. And I'm going to move it over so you can see a little better. And this might be something else that you guys consider for your title design, in order to dress it up, in order to make it more illustrative, convey a very specific meaning, maybe complements the image or images that you're using in your type, in the images that you're using in your poster. But again, if I go back and I select the type tool, and I have some type selected, you'll notice that this little tool right here where it says create warped text. If I click on that, a little dialog box should pop up. And right now there is no style that's been assigned. But if I want it to follow an arc, I can do that. And what makes this really nice is that I can always turn it off. It's non-destructive. Okay. I can always come back and change it. I can always come back here and we can look. Maybe I want this to be lower arc instead. And you can see the possibilities are limitless. If you want kind of a flag or a wavy kind of type, then it follows that path and looks, really quite, fun. So depending on what you're doing, if you want it to be a raised, flag, you can do that. And you have these settings here for that control the degree of the bend and the direction of the bend. Okay. And you have the horizontal distortion and the vertical distortion that can be changed as well. So these work really nice. As soon as I click OK for that, okay, you'll notice that the type layer has changed. It has a little arc underneath a T, meaning if I double click on it, it should bring up, come on, double click on the layer. I'll select it and I'm just going to select the tool again. There we go. And then I can change it. Let's go ahead and change it to another one. So it can be changed infinitely. So let's change it to arc lower again. Maybe arc upper. Okay. And again, if I want to change the typeface, I can. I'll click OK. I'll go back and with the type tool, I'll select the type. Well, let's select a different font. I'll click here. Let's select Baskerville here, just for the heck of it. There we go. Now, if I want to change the color of it, I can do that. Let's go ahead and change by clicking here. We can go ahead and I want to make it red or whatever color I want, or you can select individual letter forms and assign a color to each of them separately. And the same holds for, whether you want caps, lowercase, you can have a different font for each letter form if you so choose. Okay, I'm sure there is something that I'm missing, but we will have to come back to it next week when I discuss in greater depth your poster assignment. Okay, that the postcard, you're supposed to add type to it as well. And you will definitely be working in a more sophisticated fashion with type for your movie poster. Okay. So if there aren't any questions, that's going to be it for today. Okay. And again, we are not going to meet this Wednesday. We will meet next Monday and Wednesday. This should be the only time that I have to cancel. Well, I think next Monday, next Monday we won't be meeting because it's a holiday. It's President's Day. So once again, we won't meet Monday next week, but we will meet Wednesday. So keep track of this week in class and for my postings. Okay, so are there any questions? I'll put up the chat here. No, do not turn in the postcard by email. You're going to save it as a Photoshop file, and you're going to upload it to our shared Google Drive folder. Does that make sense? So you're going to take, let me hide this. So you have a Google Drive, you've already in Google Drive, right? So let's bring this back up and let's find my Google Drive folder. I'm going to hide some things here and bring them back up. I have just a single screen right now. So I usually have dual screens, but I'm in a different location today. So, shoot. I don't want Acrobat. This is what I wanted. I want, there we go. Here's our Google Drive folder. And I'm going to go back to my drive. And I'm going to go for our class. Here is Art 192, Spring 2022. I'm going to double click in there. And these are all the people that have submitted emails to me. Okay. So Paula, here is yours. So now if I double click in here and I double click on assignments, you're going to put your original Photoshop file in here. And if you have the Photoshop available, for example, on your desktop, oh, okay, well, you already have it. Cool. There you go. And the reason that I want you to, don't flatten it, please. If you have flattened it, I want to see all the layers that you've used to put this postcard together. Now, it would be nice if I saw these things in advance. A couple of things that I would do is that I would make your flying saucer much bigger. It should be an important element. If you want multiple flying saucers that kind of trail off in space, that would be kind of cool. In Hello World, it's good that it's centered, but I would pull it down just a little bit. It's a little bit too close to the top of the edge of the document. Okay, so there's my critique. You want, Bella, do you have your, oh, hold on. Let me look at yours. Let me go back to it. Bella, just make the changes and resubmit and you'll get a better grade, I guarantee you. Add some text. Technically, the swan should have a reflection, and so should the boy, since there's water here. Maybe next week, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Instead of having him sit here, what you might want to do is copy the layer and invert it. Go to Edit, Invert Layer, and then you're going to change the opacity of it and make sure that the feet touch, and that will work there. The same with the swan. And then I wouldn't change anything else, just but add some text, and some text would go perfectly in the upper left-hand corner here. And I would just use white. Does that help? Okie doke. Again, my 2 cents, and also push Bella. Go ahead and push the postmark a little bit further up into the upper right-hand corner. Okie doke. So that's it for today. Let me bring back. Come on, where are you? Oh, I'm sharing. So it really doesn't matter. I think I closed Photoshop, didn't I? Let's bring Photoshop back up. There we go. So we'll close on this. So I'm gonna say goodbye. Have a good week. I will see all of you not this Wednesday, but a week from this Wednesday, because I believe, if I'm wrong, then we will be here Monday, but I believe Monday is President's Day. Okay, so I'm gonna say goodbye. I'm gonna stop the recording